Just a few technical reminding notes before we get started. If you experience any issues with your audio or video during the conference, just refresh your browser and that should take care of everything. If you have any questions for our speakers or panel members, please do feel free to post your questions on the video wall, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. We will share with our speaker at the end of the session, and they will reply to you through the video wall or through the email afterwards. If you'd like to connect with our speakers, please move to the home lobby page. You can find the speaker by typing their names under Networking tab on the right-hand corner of your screen. We welcome all of our audience to interact with each other through our networking features. And also, please feel free to tag us on our social media handles with the hashtag AIMDigital. Greetings, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the UAE Ministry of Economy and the Annual Invest Meeting Organizing Committee, we'd like to welcome you all to the second day of AIMDigital 2020. Welcome to Future Cities Pillar at the Sustainable City Auditorium. My name is Yasmin Shah, and I'll be your MC for today. In this Future Cities Pillar, today we will continue to explore topics like healthcare, cybersecurity, and blockchain, and we have an excellent lineup of speakers and experts who will share their great insights on this. Before we sit and explore with our Future Cities experts, I'd like to mention a few technical reminding notes. If you experience any issues with your audio or video during the webinar, just refresh your browser and that should take care of everything. Also, please do feel free to post your questions on the chat wall located on the right side of the screen. Our speakers will either answer them directly on the chat wall, or we will share your questions with our speakers via email, and we will share their responses to you in a week's time. Importantly, we welcome all of our audience to interact with each other on our chat wall. Now let's dive into this panel session. In this session, we are joined by big key players in healthcare and pharmaceutical industries, and they will be discussing and sharing insights on topic, future of health and boosting innovation to combat epidemics. I'd like to introduce Mr. Jan Schmitz, who is the partner of strategy and Middle East, part of the PwC network, and he will be moderating the session. Mr. Jan, the stage is yours.
To combat epidemics. I think it's a really timely topic, which is getting accelerated right now, given the switch to remote and to virtual care in light of the current pandemic situation around COVID. And as a panel, we are fortunate today to have a high caliber selection of experts, which will look at this subject from different perspectives. My name is Jan Schmitz-Hubsch, and I'll be the moderator of this session. In real life, I'm a partner at Strategy and here in the Middle East, and I'm leading our healthcare strategy work across regulators, providers, payers, and investors here in the Middle East region. We also have on the panel today, Dr. Efrat, Dr. Efrat Shefer, who's the president of Philips in Israel, and would just like to ask yourself, Dr. Efrat, to introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you. So I'm Efrat Shefer. I'm the country leader for Philips in Israel. Philips has a significant presence in Israel, mostly for innovation, R&D, and advanced manufacturing in the fields of radiology, cardiology, and oncology. I have a PhD in physics from the Weizmann Institute of Science, and I have been with Philips for the last 20 years in various roles, starting from R&D, clinical research, venture leaderships, business leadership, and now in my role as leading the activities of Philips in Israel. I'm very honored to take part in this important conference. I would like to thank the United Arab Emirates government for inviting me, and I'm very happy that we are now in a new phase of scientific and technological collaboration that will benefit both Israel and UAE. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Dr. Efrat. We're also joined by Sinan Atlig. Sinan is the regional president of Pfizer, and so if you also would like to introduce yourself briefly, Sinan.
Thank you, Jan. My name is Sinan Atlig. I'm the regional president for Pfizer Biopharma in Africa and Middle East. And in the region, we also have a very significant presence. We operate in more than 23 countries. We have manufacturing plants in 5 of them in the region. And also we have a lot of different partnerships, including in the UAE. And also it's a great pleasure for me to be in this esteemed panel. And I also thank the UAE government for inviting Pfizer and myself to be part of it. And I'm really looking forward to the learnings from the other panelists. Thank you, John.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Sinan. Then, as a third panelist, we're being joined by Elie Chaillot. He's the Vice President and CEO Services for GE Healthcare in EMEA. So, Elie, also over to you.
Thanks, Jan. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be taking part of this panel. I've been in GE Healthcare for the last 20 years across Europe, Asia Pacific, and now based out of Dubai. I'm very pleased to bring different perspectives to this very important subject, and I'm looking forward to connecting with the panelists and with the beyond audience during this panel.
Great. Thank you, Elie. Thank you, much appreciated. And then last but not least, Jerome joins us from Cigna, and he's the CEO of Cigna in the Middle East and Africa, as well as the Senior Executive Officer and Chairman for Cigna Insurance in the Middle East. So over to you, Jerome.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to join you on this panel. So I'm in charge of Cigna for Middle East, Africa, but also more recently India, Turkey, and all Southeast Asia. So it covers roughly 8,000 people. We do propose different type of solutions. So Cigna being one of the largest health service provider across the world, and we do provide both healthcare insurance, but also different other type of health services across those markets.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jerome. And I think I'm pleased to moderate this. It's really a good selection of experts who can look at this from different fields of healthcare, whether it's the technology part or the payer part, the research part. So I think we're having a good and enlightening discussion on this. To open the conversation, I think to look at it a bit more broadly, would like to ask you, when you look at the current situation around the pandemics, but also more broadly, what do you believe, what kind of technologies or innovations in healthcare will have the largest influence over the next 10 to 20 years on how the model of healthcare will look like, and which innovations will drive really the face of healthcare over the coming years? Who would like to start to share an initial statement on the kind of innovations that we will see shaping healthcare in the next few years?
I can go first.
Dr. Efrat, please, yes.
Okay. So I think I want to start with telehealth. And when we talk about telehealth, most people kind of vision a patient calling a physician over the phone or the internet, but actually telehealth is a much wider topic. It's all about connecting health systems one to another. It's about what do we do with all the data that we have. I mean, it's not sufficient to know that 1/4 of us are going to have cardiovascular disease. It's what do we do with it? How do we prevent it? How do we treat the patient? It's also about transforming care from the hospital to community and to home, and making the community and home care an extension to the hospital system. So when we talk about telehealth, we need to kind of visualize the future hospital, which is not going to be a building in a location with waiting rooms and laboratories, etc. It's going to be kind of a network of nodes and connections. And some of them may actually have beds in them, but technologically, in other words, we will be starting a place of a new space, okay? And the connectivity and the connection between all of those will enable a new kind of care. Okay, so an example of that would be a Mercy Virtual Care Center, which is a $54 million center. It has 300 caregivers in it, and there is not even one patient in that hospital. And all those caregivers are sitting in rooms that are actually command center. They look like, you know, stock exchange investment center or kind of a flight control center. And they monitor thousands and thousands of patients at home, and in 38 hospitals that are in different states, 7 different states. So this is the future, and this is telehealth. And when we'll talk about COVID-19, I think it's also very, very relevant to what happened during the COVID-19. So I think this is one technology or a concept of technologies. Those technologies already exist, actually. So we are talking about connectivity, about aggregating data. We're talking about artificial intelligence that will go through the data and alert when necessary. We're talking about analytics and biosensors. And we are very optimistic about these technologies. And we think that those will actually transform the healthcare. Philips is commissioning every year a survey, we call it the Future Health Index. In 2020, we focused our survey on younger physicians. So we asked 3,000 physicians, also in Saudi Arabia, a lot of them, ages 20 to 40. What do they think about the future of health? And I think that more than 90% of them are looking into technology as a very strong enabler for their work in the future and are very much willing to adopt and integrate it into their day-to-day work. And we believe that this will be, 20 years from now, those physicians will be the ones that will shape the healthcare system. So we believe those things will happen. And another topic connected is kind of integrated diagnostics and treatment. And we see the emergence of those integrations coming already now, enabling first-time right decisions and treatments of patients, such saving time, saving cost, and increasing the staff experience, medical staff experience. Example of that, for example, is we have in telespace precision medicine pathway that we developed together with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And this solution actually makes Dana-Farber's knowledge and experience on oncology pathway accessible to every oncologist anywhere. It integrates the data from their genomics, pathology, radiology, and other clinical data of the patient and runs some very smart algorithm in the background to actually propose what would be, let's say, the Dana-Farber protocol for a specific patient. And such it increases and improves patient outcome, and it helps us really equalize the level of healthcare.
Very good. No, I think you said the key word there, connectivity, right? It's about connected care, integrated care, data-driven care, where the physical location of either the physicians or the service doesn't matter much because it will be very approachable and at the fingertips of patients. Who would like to react on this also, maybe to build on this point of connectivity, of integrated care, and to what extent you already see this happening today and in kind of developing the future models around this?
I can comment on that because also in the pharmaceutical sector, we also see a huge revolution happening. Especially I can see it when it comes to newer treatment options, and we are looking 10 to 20 years ahead, right? So hopefully when we come to that time, we will see a flourishing number of new treatments, which we call targeted treatments, which is like personalized medicine in oncology, in gene therapy, in immunological diseases. And many people who have a certain subtype of a disease have a much more targeted solution. And that is called personalized medicine. So that is the dream. And when we are moving in this journey of creating specific treatments for certain subgroups of population, gene expression, biomarkers, of course, we need to work hand in hand with the diagnostic companies, right? Because these diagnostic companies, if they give the industry certain targets, then we can develop a much specified or targeted treatment for that. And the more specific you get for that patient, such as the proposed guideline, right? So of Dana-Farber, then you can also get a certain product to have much better outcomes for that patient. And I think when I look what technologies will be critical to enable that, of course, I see a lot of impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning, because when we develop these products, when we do clinical trials, or when we look at the outcomes data, which is already available in the market, there's a huge amount of data, and it will only increase with more precise diagnosis, more biomarkers, and then it will be almost impossible for the human mind to look at that and to really turn it into insight on how to develop targets for drugs. So I see a lot of impact of artificial intelligence to analyze all these data, which is available in clinical research, of products which made the clinical trials and become products, and also of failures who didn't make a product. And then that can give us much better designed clinical trials. We can learn much earlier if a product is working or not, so that we can also cancel programs who doesn't have prospects. and have much faster clinical trial outcomes. And maybe I can give an example of a gene therapy, because I think for me it's really fascinating. So we have a disease called hemophilia, and many of you might know it. It's a disease of a deficiency of clotting factor, and the patients might bleed internally and externally. So far, this disease has been managed by replenishing the factor that the human body is missing. Right now, there are multiple clinical trials, including Pfizer, our company, and also of competitors, to really have a solution with one infusion for multiple years. So rather than having factors over time, that patient can be given an infusion and won't have any bleeding for a certain period of time. And hopefully in the future, when we talk about 10, 20 years, maybe for the rest of their life. So this is a complete shift of treatment of how genetic diseases can be treated. And I think really identifying the missing genes and developing treatments for different diseases, rare diseases, rare oncology products, we really need to work together in an integrated fashion, not only with diagnostic companies, with caregivers, but also with insurance, because it means a completely different treatment and care paradigm in the future.
And I think you mentioned, I was just about to prompt the payer into the discussion here, because not just because hemophilia, as an example, is probably one of the most costliest diseases for a health insurer to cover in terms of the patient cost, but also when you look at what innovations meant in the past, sometimes they had the potential to really lower the treatment cost and lower the cost of care, and other innovations or innovative drugs have also meant additional expenditure, additional cost from a payer perspective. So Jerome, since you represent the payer sector here from Cigna, what's your view on listening to these innovations, innovative technologies that are already underway or partially implemented and will happen at a larger scale? When you look at this from a payer perspective, how will this change your view on how you see health insurance or healthcare costs going forward?
I think for us, it's definitely extremely exciting, because whatever innovation that is coming, it can enable us, to your point, to improve the medical output. And that the first goal for us is making sure we do improve the health of the population we serve. And the best way to do that is obviously to find the best treatment as soon as possible, as soon as the disease starts. I think this is where, going back to the various points, data is definitely something extremely critical. And I think especially when we look at how we can connect the dots, meaning with IoT and all the various new ways of monitoring data. I will take two interesting examples. One of them is obviously chronic disease management, like diabetes, and how we can avoid by having a proper monitoring and making sure we intervene as soon as possible to avoid people going to emergency that could be quite expensive. Another element we are looking at, for instance, and we've launched some specific program like in Australia under my perimeter, like trying to avoid any readmission of people who are getting out of hospitalization by having the right track record and making sure we do have connectivity between doctors and people, making sure they understand what's happening to them and avoiding them going back to hospital. So I think definitely extremely exciting. Maybe two other perspectives that for us are extremely important if we think about the long run. Obviously, it was also mentioned artificial intelligence. And I think this is where it can bring probably much more depth and knowledge and precision in terms of medical output again. And the other element I want to bring to the table as well is robotics. Obviously, we do see a lot of innovation there. And again, you can look at it from different perspectives. Yes, those technology could be quite expensive in the first place, but at the same time, they bring a lot of additional value as well. And again, that's extremely important for us, because ultimately, all what we can do is critical in terms of medical output. Last point again is, I think data for me is also a great source of not only accessing to care or curing people, but also prevention as well. Meaning, how do we make people aware on their own situation, improving their own health as soon as possible, and trying to prevent, for instance, getting to a stage where you have to treat the chronic disease and condition, because lifestyle are changing. And I think we can definitely leverage data more and more to be aware and create that kind of awareness as well for the future.
Excellent, excellent. And I would also
Jean,
like to, yes.
Can I add one
Yeah.
point? I couldn't agree more with Jerome, and it's really an issue which is near and dear to my heart on prevention, right? So, and when I look at it, and you raise the point, right? Because these gene therapies or targeted treatments won't be cheap. So there's a certain value attached to that. And I really look at, when I look at the healthcare system, we need a system that needs to incentivize innovation while simultaneously ensuring access, which is not easy. And what we believe is this will require a fundamental shift in the way we think about the value that medicines deliver and how all participants in the system are reimbursed with regard to that value. Maybe as an example, imagine a system in which hospitals are rewarded for keeping patients from being readmitted, where physicians get paid more to prevent the disease than they do simply treat it, or where companies like us, like Pfizer, get paid based on the number of strokes we prevent or number of cancer patients who go into full remission rather than the number of pills that we sell. And really, to make this a reality, I think we need really a policy change to remove all the roadblocks in the current system and really to rethink the system when we think of 10 to 20 years forward.
Excellent. And I think we'll definitely talk about specifically the hurdles or challenges and what needs to happen in order for these kind of innovations to make it to the market faster. But before we do that, I think I would like to take us back a bit to the topic of the current kind of pandemic situation, because a lot of the kind of diseases and diagnosis we talked about so far are more in the area of chronic diseases or non-infectious diseases. And unfortunately, I think the year so far has taught us that the infectious diseases are also still a big topic. It's not just about the NCDs and the chronic diseases. So I guess if we explore a little bit what happened during the last few months and what were really the health and well-being challenges that were faced by people and by systems during the last months of the pandemics, and to what extent have already innovations or technology helped to overcome these, the current situation, and maybe looping Elie also into the discussion here. What's your view on what happened over the last few months, and how was innovative technology already at hand to help to overcome the situation or to manage the situation to this point?
You said it well, Jan. I think the last time we talked about communicable diseases was a long time ago. So we as the medtech companies, we have invested a lot in non-communicable diseases in the past. So and then pharma could say the same. The interesting thing about healthcare is that we tailor for 8 billion people, and as much as we are the same, we are very different biologically speaking. And this was a virus that we didn't anticipate. We didn't know exactly how it transmits, what would be the effects of that virus, and we dealt with this virus differently altogether. And I think when I look at how this happened and the lack of anticipation of this happening and the scale of it, I think the first thing that we had to deal with is the overcapacity or undercapacity, I would say, of the healthcare systems. This is number one. Number two is the uncertainty about the virus itself. Number three is the effect of different ages, different personas, different part of our, I would say, of the population across the globe. You would see a different way of dealing with it. And I think we didn't know how it transmits. Will it go with the transmission with droplets? Will it go with breathing? Will it go with liquid on material? There was a lot of uncertainty, I would say. And I think the way the whole world dealt with it is, first of all, go on safety, right? So make sure that caregivers are safe, make sure that medtech companies supporting these devices are safe, make sure that government officials or government services continue to work, banking, insurance, in order to do that. But I would say the first thing that we had to deal with, and I would say I would put this first, which is the supply chain handicap. So we had to go and deal with new routes, go take private planes, private routes to bring in equipment. I would say pharma did the same thing for drugs, making sure even that subcomponent suppliers for us to go and build equipment are able to ship to us on time and in the right quantities. We had to go and revive ventilators that we have retired from the market for 10 years ago. Luckily, we had some in stock are low and that we have to revive them. We have to go and work with sport to go and I would say, do a basic system of ventilators. We had to double 5 times our quantity and output of supply chain. We had to go and make sure that we have the right digital technology to connect with the caregivers on a daily basis. The one thing that staggered me during this pandemic is, and it's still, by the way, is the resilience of our people. They are much more resilient than you think. And I was extremely pleased to see how we came together as I would say, humans and go and deal with that common enemy, which is COVID-19.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you mentioned the ventilators, you mentioned other kind of devices that were in short supply. And what I found also interesting is that it was not necessarily a lack of modern technology or innovation, but it was basic things like gloves and masks and gowns and PPE that caused a huge issue in the beginning, especially before production ramped up and the supply chains were back in place. But if we look at also the more kind of technology aspects then around telecare, remote care, whether it's also for mental health, which is increasingly important, the kind of mental health of caregivers, mental health of families, tracking of patients, tracking of the population at large. What other kind of, let's say, emerging innovations did you see that got accelerated maybe over the last few months and that will be leapfrogging as a result of this, because there's a much more urgent need to kind of scale them up and bring them into the healthcare systems at this point?
Accelerated is the right word because they didn't start with the pandemic. This started before. If you go have a look on the last 2-3 decades in healthcare, you notice the explosion of data. You know, we used to do a couple of images on CT scan. Today you do 3,000 images with a CT scan. And then you look at the in vitro data and in vivo data, and the brain of a human being cannot process all this data on his or her own. And so if you are a doctor and you see, let's say, 10,000 patients in your life, data and technology can see millions and hundreds of millions of data, and they will be able to connect outcome to effect, to cause, to how to treat. And so I think integration of healthcare horizontally is something that is being completely accelerated with COVID in terms of how do I make sure that to Sinan's point, I'm able to incentivize the outcome and not the task itself. And so I think everyone is going for value healthcare. It's even more clear when you have the pandemic because we need to just treat it and get over it and do something else. There will be a lot of consolidation also vertically, where you want to go into care path areas versus wards and making sure that we get more efficient there. I think the AI technology is accelerated. Like, for instance, in G Healthcare, we have AI embedded in the device. So we don't bring AI as only a cloud, but we also embed it in the device. So we had mobile X-rays that had AI technology to go and detect pneumonia, which is in a sense COVID-19 symptoms also. We also innovated differently by getting CT scans in a container in no time during the COVID, and we have the specialists all over the world to be able to do I would say a screening place outside of the hospital just for the volume of patients coming with symptoms. I'd say the command center that Dr. Efrat talked about in the beginning also is something that we have been investing in since more than 10-20 years now, and it has boomed during the pandemic. Command centers that looks like NASA basically, and we have taken this from our aviation business. GE also we manufacture engines, and basically we have all data at hand. We have tiles. We look at tons of data and we take action with this data. So this is what makes a difference between a command center and a BI, Bureau or Business Intelligence, where you can take action. You can accelerate I would say the discharge of a patient from a bed, and you can increase productivity, or you can even move material and make sure you are more efficient. So I would say home health, telehealth, I would say integration of health horizontally and vertically are aspects, and data science applied to health are basically the technology that has been accelerated with the pandemic.
I very much agree.
Yeah.
I very much agree. I think what we saw in this pandemic was a significant pressure on the health systems. We saw lack in facilities, and we saw a lack in personnel, and huge pressure on the hospital personnel. So I think any technology that can support reducing the pressure from those personnel and reducing the number of patients, making the treatment of those more efficient. All of those technologies kind of leapfrogged. I agree with Elie that it has been there for some time, but the adoption of those things really leapfrogged. And when you adopt, you also improve very significantly. So for example, one of the bottlenecks that we saw in many hospitals was intensive care units, because a lot of people were going on ventilation, sometimes even worse or more complicated cases. And those command centers, of course, are, you know, you have very few people and the data flows automatically. And those very intelligent algorithms, call them artificial intelligence or machine learning, but they're all very intelligent algorithms. They kind of automatically go through that. They raise the alert. So the clinical staff doesn't have to look at all the people all the time. They actually get alerts, they get predictions when those patients are going to deteriorate. So all those technologies existed, but now I think their use is far more reaching. And very similar command centers are also already in deployment for home people. So you're at home, you have biosensors, you have all sorts of parameters flowing to the command center. Again, the algorithms allow you to identify which patient needs to have a team going to their home, which patients maybe have to go to the hospital. So you reduce significantly the number of patients in a hospital. We deployed a virtual clinic in Saudi Arabia. It was up in 6 weeks because the technology was there. It was really a question of connecting different things that already existed. And basically, it's a connected platform. You mentioned connections before in what I said before. So different systems exist. They don't necessarily talk with each other fluently. And I'm talking about information systems, etc. So those are connected. They're connected to the EMR, which is electronic medical record of the patient. There is an interface to the patient. He can send a video, he can send a document. And those systems, for example, it supports up to 100,000 concurrent users, can support up to 50,000 engagement per day. So this kind of things happened very, very quickly during the pandemic, okay? We started a kind of an online web survey for COVID-19, deployed in hundreds of hospitals across the world, reducing significantly the number of people that actually go to the hospital and reducing the pressure from the clinical staff, which I think next to the shortage in technology like ventilators and monitors, etc., that we all experienced, and all the medical devices companies rushed to, you know, fill in this gap at the very beginning of the pandemic, as Elie described. Next to that was a shortage of the people and the ability to control so many of those. And again, AI plays a huge role in this, helping with diagnostic, helping with treatment choices, etc.
Very good. And I think to direct the discussion into a related area there, because we talk now a lot about the initial treatment, the response of the healthcare system to manage the outbreak and to get things under control. A big topic right now is, of course, also on what's next and how is it possible to control and prevent the further spread, and what's the requirement to reduce the lockdown and the restrictions, and how to kind of go back to a more normal way of delivering care. And from a pharma or life sciences perspective, so I'm looking a bit into Sinan's direction here.
Sure.
The question around vaccination, how can we fast track the development of the vaccine and making the vaccine available at scale, is probably something which will take a huge influence over how the landscape will look like over the coming months. So what's your view on how has it so far already been possible to accelerate development of the vaccine? And what are some of the technologies and innovations also that help us to get to this point sooner?
Sure. So actually, one thing that is certain is the only way to end this pandemic is to have a safe and effective vaccine that people can trust in and will get vaccinated. So, and that has been a huge acceleration in technology. So usually a vaccine takes to develop 10 to 15 years. Right now, not only us as Pfizer, but all the industry is trying to do it in 1 to 2 years. And I think there are two factors. One, there are different technologies which are available now. One of them is a platform that we are using together with our partner BioNTech which is called a modified RNA platform, which is basically giving a body a modified RNA, a protein that the body produces a similar protein called to the spike protein in the virus to provide immunity. And that technology has the potential to bring a faster vaccine to life when it comes to development, because it doesn't depend on a deactivated virus. So it's a completely new technology. I am saying it has the potential because it is not launched before, right? So it's the first time that this vaccine has been tried in phase 3 clinical trials in humans, and we are going to see the results. But this is just one technology. When we look, there are more than 40 clinical trials running now, so for 40 different vaccines. And what is really making a difference is a difference in thinking. It's one part is the technology like modified RNA that I mentioned. The other is how we do things as the pharma industry. We used to do things sequentially. So we researched, then we found the lead candidate, then we start development. And once development is finished, we started manufacturing. Then we applied for regulatory approval. So it was everything in sequence. Right now, we are doing things in parallel. So while we are researching the product, we see how we can develop it. While we develop, we think how we can mass manufacture it, or how we can apply to regulatory approval. So this change in mode of thinking is, I think, really the secret. And of course, the risk taking. So Pfizer on its own invested more than $1 billion to enable this sequential approach, right? Because you need to invest at risk in manufacturing. You need to invest at risk in development without knowing if you were ever going to get a return or not. So it's a complete shift in mindset. But one thing is for certain, that we will never cut corners on safety. And recently, Pfizer, along with other 8 pharma companies, signed a pledge that we will hold to highest scientific and ethical standards and rigor when it comes to our clinical trials and when it comes to our filing to regulatory authorities, because we really, for us, it is very important. And also we know that for the patients, there needs to be an environment of trust in the vaccine. So although doing things in parallel rather than sequentially, we will never cut corners on safety.
Excellent. And I think you mentioned the safety, you mentioned the kind of hurdles or challenges also along the way of bringing such a vaccine to the market. And if we broaden this discussion maybe a bit and think about the kind of hurdles or challenges at this point that would still prevent us from leverage innovations more quickly or more effectively, of course, the reimbursement and the payment for innovation and ensuring that they find their way into the coverage of patients is important. So Jerome, if you look at how, what kind of hurdles or challenges maybe do you still see to leverage innovation more quickly from a maybe cost-benefit analysis or health technology assessment analysis, and what's also the role of maybe payers to work together with the industry to bring these kind of innovations into the coverage and into the market more efficiently?
Yeah, and maybe if you allow me, in the first place, just looking back at what technology has brought to us during this pandemic and during this phase. And I think if we think about our daily life, basically we had 2 different elements we faced. One is the fear factor. The second one was the disappearing of social interaction. And if we step back, actually on the fear factor, going back to what has been mentioned before, telehealth has been a booming activity, definitely. I mean, we saw around 30 times more teleconsultation than ever before. So it just gives you a range of the impact, so a massive impact there. Obviously, because people wanted to avoid any physical interaction, so they were much more comfortable accessing to care virtually as much as possible. The second one is technology can bring, on one side, very positive elements. So I mentioned the disappearing of social interaction. So people, actually, we've done a lot of studies and we've seen that people were even connected more with each other, but through the phone during the months of April, during the lockdown, more than ever before again. And we saw even the level of loneliness decreasing. So basically technology was bringing a very positive element. At the same time, what we saw as well is it was bringing a lot of challenges, not only on the stress side and mental health factor as well. We saw more than 90% of the population being under stress during this period, working much more than ever before, working hard both late evening, weekends as well. So this is something we need to take into account in terms of lifestyle and evolution as well, on how technology can affect our daily life as well. Going back to your question, I think on what we should do, I think there are two first elements for me. One is developing simple and affordable solution to access to care, because going back to the global, topics, when you look at the medical trend, it's a growing trend. It could be, anywhere from 5% in some jurisdiction towards 10% in some others. So it means cost of healthcare is growing, and I think we are all keen to spend more to protect our life and to get access to a better health for all of us and our family members. So that's absolutely critical. So we need to find ways to leverage technology to bring better solution, better medical output at an affordable access to care. I think the second element is, as it was mentioned before, how do we make sure we create an alignment of interest between the various components of the healthcare ecosystem in order to make sure that there is a real incentives to push all in the right direction, making sure that no one has a different interest in the mechanism. And it's true that it's a very complex situation because you have many components, and as it was mentioned before by Sinan, you do have different moving pieces, different forces. So I think it's extremely important that we do all invest in the same direction to create a better health for the population, and making sure we do it in a way that would be affordable and that will bring that kind of innovation in place for the future.
No, thank you, Jerome. I think very important points there around how the different sectors can work together. And specifically, if we look at what can the different players or the different sectors in healthcare do to accelerate these kind of innovations and the application of innovation. When we think about it from the perspective of the regulators and the policymakers, the payers, the providers, tech companies, but also investors, what's your view, maybe Dr. Efrat or Elie, on how these different players can contribute to accelerating innovation?
Yeah. So I think to start with, I think it's very clear that it's no more a one organization game. It's all about an ecosystem and open innovation and collaboration. And it's clear that the solution is not in any single pocket. So we need a very, very strong collaboration of caregivers and governments, academia, the financial organizations such as insurers, payers, and the industry. Okay, and we see a shift more and more from internal innovation into a kind of external collaborative thing. So this is definitely one of the important things. I think when you look at hurdles where regulators can help us, I think that the question of data privacy is becoming more and more crucial. The regulations are very limiting, while the technology is advancing and requires a really bigger and bigger patient cohorts and using data from more than one nation or one country. I think if you look at the balance between the risks or the perceived risk of data leakage, which of course we all want to prevent, versus the gains, this is changing with the change of technology because the potential gains are increasing. So I think the regulators, together with the industry, together with the caregivers, we should all be looking into what's the best balanced point of work. And I think that the smaller countries such as the United Emirates and Israel are actually the ones that are losing most from those regulations, because our ability to create large data sets without sharing externally across nations is very limited, and then the introduction of those technologies is becoming slower in those countries. So I think this is one very important point. And the other is that is also, again, I'm going to my theme of connection, is cybersecurity, which is becoming more and more crucial. And it connected to the data privacy, it's connected to the enabling of technologies. I believe that we see more and more hacking into health systems, into hospitals, and the potential there for damage is definitely there. I think healthcare community, again, with regulations, the governments, and everyone, really works already. We are working and developing a full framework for this. I think every development of every solution and offerings that we make has to have built-in security from the ground up. It's an essential element for us in everything that we do. I'm sure that we are not unique in this. I think the entire industry is moving there and shifting. And I think this needs to be a very, very central in what we're doing. And when we're talking about hurdles in moving to the cloud, in moving to connected care, all of those ideas about telehealth, et cetera, the technology is there. And just like we think about the safety of the vaccinations, we need to think about the safety of our offerings when it comes to cybersecurity, and like others, we don't cut corners around that either.
Great, no, thank you. And maybe Elie, to build on this point, if you think about also from your perspective of where you're sitting, what would you say are your kind of wishes in terms of what other stakeholders in the healthcare system should do to promote innovation and accelerate the innovation, whether it's the governments or the payers, the healthcare providers, maybe also the patients and investors, so that would help us.
I agree with everything that Dr. Efrat said. I would like to look at it from a different lens here. I think the cost of healthcare have been going in one direction in the past decades. It's going up, and I know something about it because I pay Cigna insurance bill at the end for my employees here. So Jerome, I'm a good customer of yours. I think, you know, I want to give you I'll tell you a story. I attended a week in Harvard Business School last year, where we had eminent, I would say, players, caregivers, pharma, medtech companies, you name it. We were like 80 people in the room. What was staggering for me was the amount of lack of collaboration between the different players. You know, everyone is holding his cards close to his chest. And I think today we cannot continue to solve everyone in his own place under his own roof. We have to connect in vivo to in vitro. We have to connect pharma and medtech together. We need to work with payers to go for value healthcare. We cannot continue to have regulators approve a technology in a vacuum without understanding what would this mean in terms of curing at the end and bring an outcome. If I would like to bring change into healthcare industry today, I would start with the outcome first. I say, here's what I would like to achieve. And to do that, here's what each player will have to do. Because if not, the only thing you will see happening, number of people will grow on this planet, and number of data will grow. And if you don't connect the data and understand and make a very good work on screening the data, connecting the dots on what really matters and drive outcome, then we will go nowhere. So I think we are at the verge of a huge transformation again in healthcare, and we have to come together to work on it as different players.
Mm-hmm. Jerome, I saw you also that you were about to enter the conversation when I asked Elie about this topic. So anything you would like to add on this?
Yeah, and maybe building up on what Elie has just said, I think obviously we are talking a lot about the pandemic today, and it's a hot topic, and that's quite normal now. When you look back at the medical trend, there are some external factor or factor based on lifestyle. I mean, aging population, increasing trend of chronic disease based on lifestyle. So we also need to, on top of what Elie mentioned, is work around prevention and trying to improve behaviors of the population as well, because that's also an important factor if we want to enable those ecosystems to work better. So I think it's a combination between what was said by Elie. I'm also very supportive of what was said before regarding data. And I think as much as we support cybersecurity, more protection, making sure that there is no leakage, at the same time, I fully support the view that, yes, we need to be able to share technology at the global level. And we've seen that, you know, most of the study, even if I take only the example of the pandemic, we've learned a lot by comparing what was happening in various places of the world where different tests were done at the same time. So I think it just demonstrates the value of being able to share. And I think that's also another point that is extremely critical to make sure we can innovate more, faster, better for the benefits of all the population.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, this takes us, I think, is towards an outlook of how we believe innovations will shape the landscape going forward. And you and your company specifically are already taking some bets in the research, in funding research, in developing new products, developing new technology and applying them over the coming years. But I would also like to ask you individually, if you think about innovations and technologies that will drive healthcare going forward, where would you personally put your money at? So where would you personally invest when you think about what will be the technology or the type of innovations that will generate value for the healthcare systems. But at the same time, I think in line with what we discussed, it's important to generate value for the system, for different stakeholders themselves, because it has to be aligned with this. So if we just make a kind of virtual round around the table here on this topic, starting with Dr. Efrat maybe, and then I'll go clockwise the way I see you here. Where would you personally put your money right now when it comes to innovation? What do you believe will be the kind of innovations to bet on for the next maybe 3 to 5 years?
So I was thinking a lot about this question, and I think in general, anything that is going to improve patient experience, patient outcomes, staff satisfaction, and decrease cost is going to be a good investment. Okay, any of those, but those are the criteria I would actually use. Specifically, imagine that we could have a digital twin. So it's kind of each of us would have his own twin, a digital twin, where all our digital data will flow continuously all the time. It is going to be our health data, it's going to be our genetics profile, it's going to be from biosensors, it's going to be from the social platforms for applications. So all of this goes, and we kind of create our twin, digital twin. And then this digital twin can be used to evaluate, right? It can evaluate risk factors that we have. We talked about prevention, right? So how do we look at the lifestyle of a person, his genetic profile, his health record, and see what are the things that are coming up it could potentially impact. And then we work with that person to prevent those. But also once we are already there, different treatment can be modeled on this digital twin of ours. Instead of trying them on us, we can try them on our twin. We can see which one is going to be the best one. It's going to save a lot of cost. It's going to also go for our first time right, where everyone is getting treated exactly as they should, with a very personal profile for themselves. So if I could, if I could get to a place where we have something like that, that would be definitely technology I would love to invest in.
Very interesting. I think it's also interesting that you mentioned a digital twin, because the place where a lot of focus on this is currently being paid and where the digital twin is being established, I think, is NEOM in Saudi Arabia, where the ambition is to have a digital twin for every inhabitant of NEOM going forward. So I think that's a space to watch in the Middle East specifically from that perspective as well. And certainly then your vision is aligned with NEOM's vision in terms of having the digital twin as one of the key elements of the future system there. So maybe Sinan, if you want to go next, where would you put your money in terms of innovation in the next 3 to 5 years? And I think you might be on mute.
Thank you. My daughter was creeping in, so that's why I put on mute. So where I would put my money. So I'm actually putting my own personal money in some of the biotech companies that are developing personalized medicine, gene therapies, because I think I can see the revolution happening sooner or later. So that's one. But an interesting angle that I would bring is fintech. And you can ask why. Because especially I'm responsible for Africa and Middle East. And in our region, we have the richest countries and also the poorest in the world. And what we are seeing, especially in countries with out-of-pocket expenditure, like Egypt, like Morocco, Sub-Saharan Africa, we believe that there is the space in which companies will help, fintech companies will help patients with different payment methods to afford the medicines. And we are actively working with NGOs and with these companies to have tiered pricing. So people who have a certain level of income, higher than a threshold, pay the less price. People who has less income pay a percentage of it, and people at a below level of income even pay nothing. And I think to enable that, we first need partners like fintech companies to enable these transactions. So, and I think they are flourishing in these countries. I call them like solution providers. So these are also interesting companies to watch for, and companies who can propose a solution, an integrated solution. And I don't know whether you heard about it, but there is a very interesting company in Indonesia called Gojek. So Gojek started as a motor courier company, and then they started delivering medicines apart from everything else. And especially in this pandemic, can you imagine not going to the hospital or pharmacy, but your medicine delivered to your doorstep? Mm-hmm. And then last, I think February, I visited their headquarters, and right now they are doing income verification, tiered pricing. So as a patient, at the touch of an app, you can visit a physician through telemedicine. The physician can prescribe you a medicine. That medicine needs to be reimbursed at a certain copay, and then they also organize with the pharmaceutical companies or any other NGOs to pay for the rest if they don't have the income level, and then that medicine will be delivered to your doorstep. So for a patient, without leaving their home, they can do all these steps, even though they are not enrolled in a healthcare system. So I think these type of companies who can integrate many platforms and propose a patient-centric solution, as Dr. Efrat mentioned, are the ones to watch for.
No, I think it's interesting that what I really agree with is that sometimes innovation happens not necessarily in the places where you would expect it, whether this is Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv or Abu Dhabi or Riyadh, but it happens sometimes in unexpected places. And something I've also been watching closely is, for example, the mobile payment in Kenya with the integration of Safaricom as a telecom provider. Exactly. And the M-Pesa payment mechanism, which has driven a lot of innovation on digital payment, also for health insurance, for healthcare provision. And it's true. I mean, it's not always where you expect it to happen necessarily from a development perspective. But over to you, maybe Elie, and then Jerome. Where would you put your money going forward?
I would put my money in GE Healthcare, and I'll tell you why. I'm very biased. No, but seriously speaking, I think that data is the new black. Data is a new black. There's an explosion of data, and data will help us drive precision medicine. And to what Dr. Efrat said and Sinan, I think this is converging, whether it's a digital twin, whether it's a genome and how you deal with the DNA of every different person here, and then how you make the economics of healthcare work. How many billions have been invested in Alzheimer research, and how many millions have been invested in malaria? And simply because the economics don't work. And I think today with data, we would be able to work on it better. AI applied to healthcare will make a revolution. And I think if we are able to get the AI and the knowledge of the doctors, because AI will never replace doctors, let's agree on that. AI is exactly how we train the system. It's machine learning, and we will need to have both together based on assumptions. You will drive conclusions. So I think I would go into data, into algorithm building, into AI, and I think this will drive value healthcare for governments and the private sector in the future.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Elie. And then to round it off, Jerome, from your perspective, what do you think will be the returns and the value that's going to be created around innovations in healthcare over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think, first of all, fully aligned with all my colleagues around data analytics. For me, it's definitely the critical element to improve both prevention, but also medical output, and also creating that kind of alignment between the various, pillars of the ecosystem. Now, I think in terms of value creation, I think definitely the way we look at it is how can we really improve the population health? That's really critical. And how can we monitor better the evolution of the cost? As it was mentioned before, we have a very different situation across the market in the region. We do have, and we shouldn't forget that, we do have countries where they are really struggling to access to care. It seems normal for many of us, but it's not normal for many of the population around the region. So definitely important for us to bring different solution, innovation, to give them that kind of access to care, to drugs in various ways, and making sure it really improves their daily life, because those people are suffering every day. And for me, this is the most important output for us for the next 3 to 5 years, is how can we improve really in those markets where I'm going from time to time, like African countries, where definitely they are facing really daily lives that are extremely difficult. And we need to get there to a point where we improve the situation.
Great. Thank you very much. I think with this, we also reached the hour here. I greatly enjoyed the conversations. Obviously, a topic that you could talk on for a lot longer, but we covered a lot of ground, I believe, from the usual suspects such as AI or in data integration and all the way to command centers that are kind of airline-style command centers to delivery services in Indonesia. So I think it was a pretty rich conversation to cover this topic from different angles. And I want to thank you all for your contribution. And with that, maybe end the panel session today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, John. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your insights and making this a truly engaging conversation. Great insights from Dr. Efrat, Mr. Sinan, Elie, and Jerome. It was indeed a pleasure having you today. To our audiences, if you'd like to connect with our speakers, please move to the home lobby page. You can find the speakers by typing their names under Networking tab on the right hand of your screen. We welcome all of our audience to interact with each other on our chat wall. Please stay tuned with us as we have exciting panels on cybersecurity coming up shortly.